"44 miles per hour," Marcus said quietly, his eyes already in the mirror. The blue and white strobes were distant but definite, maybe 200 yards back on Route 22, and moving faster than the traffic ahead of them justified. Marcus had been watching the speedometer the way other people watch the road, not obsessively, but with the specific attention of a man who understands that compliance is the only argument that matters in this particular conversation. Diana stopped mid-sentence. She had been talking about a load-bearing problem in a bridge design that her firm was reviewing. Something about the relationship between compression forces and the integrity of the western expansion joint. And her voice had that texture it got when she was working through something in real time, when the words came faster than she usually let them. Marcus loved that voice. He loved it in the conference rooms where she presented to boards of engineers who had definitely not expected to be told they were wrong by a woman in a charcoal suit. He loved it in the kitchen on Sunday mornings when she was making breakfast and explaining some new problem to him that he would never fully understand but would listen to anyway. He loved it less in the moment it stopped. Diana reached forward and turned off the stereo without being asked. The song that had been playing, something soft, something almost like humming, disappeared. The silence that replaced it was not empty. It was full of the specific weight of a black woman in America adjusting herself to the presence of a badge and all the history that came with it. They were on Route 22, heading northwest out of Milford City toward Pine Ridge. It was 11:14 p. On a Friday night in late September, they had been driving home from their 12th anniversary dinner at a restaurant Diana had chosen 6 weeks ago. On a morning, she had turned to him over breakfast and said, with the precision she brought to everything, "We are going to go to Carmichael's on the 23rd, 7 o'clock. I don't want you to cancel. Twice is a pattern, Marcus. 3 times would be a choice." He had almost canceled twice. There had been the raid on September 19th that ran 14 hours past its planned end. There had been the deposition on the 21st that went into the evening. Both times. He had picked up his phone to call Diana and told himself to wait, to see if he could manage it. And both times she had come downstairs in a dress he had not seen before and said, "We're leaving at 6:20. He had not canceled. The dinner had been good. Diana had ordered the halibut and talked about a structural problem in a bridge design that her firm was reviewing for the state. And Marcus had ordered the lamb and listened and watched his wife work through a problem the way other people might watch a bird navigate complex air currents, with the specific appreciation of someone who understood how rare it was to see someone do a difficult thing with absolute confidence. Now they were driving home. Now the blue and white strobes were closing the distance. Marcus signaled and pulled smoothly to the right shoulder of Route 22. The shoulder was gravel and dirt, the kind of place where you could feel the wheels shift their grip on the pavement. He was careful with it. He was careful with everything about driving. He killed the engine. He rolled down all 4 windows. He placed both of his hands on the top of the steering wheel, palms down, fingers visible. He did not reach for his federal credentials. Not yet. Not until it was asked. Diana was looking straight ahead. Her hands were in her lap. She had not moved since turning off the stereo. Marcus was 44 years old. He was 6'1", broad-shouldered. The kind of physical presence that sometimes made people nervous without him saying anything at all. He was an assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Violent Crimes and Public Corruption Task Force, Mid-Atlantic region. He had taken down corrupt state senators and organized crime operations, and men with significant resources who understood that they had significant resources and acted accordingly. He had been in rooms with people who wanted to kill him, and had learned that the specific quality of stillness, not passivity, but the deliberate absence of motion, was more powerful than speed could ever be. He was also the son of a man named William Cole, who had been a postal worker in Raleigh, North Carolina, and who had been pulled over 11 times in one calendar year on the same road he drove to work every single day. His father never complained. He just drove slower. He had explained this to Marcus one afternoon when Marcus was 16 and had asked why he drove like an old man on the interstate. His father had said, very simply, because they are looking for a reason. Marcus had left Raleigh at 18 and never went back to live there again. The officer pulled up behind them. The strobes continued, painting the interior of the car in alternating blue and white, like a visual version of panic. Marcus watched him approach in the side mirror. White male, mid-30s, broad across the shoulders like Marcus was, but built like someone who had put the weight on deliberately, like a man who had gone to the gym and thought about getting bigger every time he went. The officer's name tag was Tolliver. His face had the specific expression of a man who had already decided what was true before he had any evidence to support it. "License and registration," Tolliver said. "Not a greeting, just a demand, the way you might ask someone to step aside on the sidewalk." Marcus had already prepared for this. He had registered the car in his own name. He had made sure his license was current. He had prepared for this the way someone prepares for a conversation they know is going to be hostile, but that they have to attempt anyway, because not attempting it is not an option. "They're in the glove compartment," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "I'm going to reach down and get them. Okay?" He did not wait for Tolliver to say okay. He reached down and opened the glove compartment with his right hand and retrieved the registration with his left hand still visible on the wheel. He had done this before. He had done this in his mind 1,000 times. His father had done it 11 times in 1 year. He handed the documents through the window. Tolliver took them without acknowledgement. "Step out of the vehicle," Tolliver said. Diana turned to look at Marcus. Her eyes said something that her voice did not get to say. "Am I free to go, or am I being detained?" Marcus asked. It was not a question born from hostility. It was a question born from precision. There was a legal difference. There were rights that attached to that difference. Marcus understood that difference the way Diana understood load-bearing calculations. Tolliver's jaw tightened. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus stepped out of the vehicle. He was very careful about how he did it. No sudden movements. No gesture that might be misinterpreted. He had trained for this, not officially, but in the way that you train for a conversation you know is coming, the way you rehearse in your head the words you might say and the movements you might make. "Put your hands on the hood," Tolliver said. Marcus put his hands on the hood of his own car. The metal was still warm from the drive. It was a September night, which meant it was just beginning to turn cool, which meant the hood was warm enough that Marcus could feel the residual heat from the engine through his palms. Tolliver's second officer was approaching from the second patrol car. This one was older, maybe 55, with the kind of face that had seen a lot of things and had decided to stop being surprised by any of them. His name tag said Whitfield. "License and registration checkout," Whitfield said quietly, looking at the documents. "Vehicle is registered. Insurance is current." Tolliver did not acknowledge this. He was looking at Marcus in the way you look at something you have decided is a problem. "What's your business driving through Pine Ridge at 11:15 at night?" Tolliver asked. "I live in Pine Ridge," Marcus said. "We're coming home from dinner." "That right," Tolliver said. It was not a question. "You know what I think?" Marcus did not answer. because the question was rhetorical, and anything he said would be used as further evidence of guilt, the way that words always were in these conversations. "I think you might have been speeding," Tolliver said. "I was going 44 miles per hour," Marcus said. "The speed limit is 45. "That's not what my radar said," Tolliver said. "My radar said 51. Marcus had been going 44 miles per hour. He had been watching his speedometer. He had been precise about it. He understood what precision meant in this context. It meant the difference between a warning and a warning escalated into something more serious. But his precision meant nothing. Tolliver's radar meant nothing. What mattered was what Tolliver said was true, and what he could make stick. "I want to be clear," Marcus said, "about what actually happened and what I can verify. I was going 44. The registered speed limit is 45. "Are you calling me a liar?" Tolliver asked. This was the pivot point. This was where the conversation became something else. This was where Marcus's father's 11 stops became relevant, not as history, but as prediction. "I'm telling you what I know to be true," Marcus said carefully. "Get your hands off the hood," Tolliver said. "You're under arrest." "For what?" Marcus asked. "Speeding, reckless endangerment, failure to comply with an officer's lawful commands." Marcus had not failed to comply with anything. Marcus had done everything Tolliver had asked. But that was not the point. The point was that Tolliver had decided Marcus was the problem, and everything else was just confirmation of what he had already chosen to believe. "I'd like to see your probable cause," Marcus said. It was the wrong thing to say. It was also the right thing to say. It was the thing you said when you understood that there was no right thing to say. So you might as well say the true thing. Tolliver's hand went to his belt. His hand went to his service weapon. Diana's voice came from inside the car. "Marcus." It was not a word. It was a name. It was the sound of his wife, understanding that this was about to become something that could not be undone by being reasonable. Marcus's hands were still on the hood. His hands were visible. His body was positioned as submissively as a tall black man's body could be positioned in front of a police officer with his hand on his weapon on a dark road in a small town that he had chosen to move to for the schools. This was the moment where something shifts. This was the moment where compliance becomes insufficient because the goalpost has moved and you are not being given the option to move it with it. Marcus looked at Whitfield. Whitfield was not looking at him. Whitfield was looking away, in the way that people look away when something is happening that they do not want to have to acknowledge. "I want to make something clear," Marcus said, and his voice was still level, still calm, still the specific kind of calm that comes from having decided that panic is a luxury you cannot afford. "I am an assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Violent Crimes and Public Corruption Task Force. I am on this road with my wife. We are coming home from our anniversary dinner. I was going 44 miles per hour. That is the truth." Tolliver's hand was still on his weapon. "I'm going to reach into my jacket," Marcus said, "and show you my credentials, slowly, so there is no misunderstanding." He reached slowly. He was very deliberate about slowly. He reached into his jacket and removed his badge and credentials, the leather holder that contained his identification as an assistant special agent in charge, and he held it in front of him so Tolliver could see. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Tolliver's face changed. It was not that he became apologetic, or that he suddenly understood the severity of what he had done. It was that his face became the face of someone who had just realized that the consequence equation had shifted. That what he might have gotten away with 10 minutes ago was now happening in front of witnesses and in front of the wife of a federal agent who had the specific resources to make things very complicated for him. "I didn't know," Tolliver said. But he did not say it like an apology. He said it like an excuse. He said it like the problem was not what he had done, but the fact that he had not known, going in, that this particular stop was going to have complications. "I'm going to document this interaction," Marcus said quietly. He still had not taken his hands off the hood. "I'm going to note the time, the location, and the fact that you escalated this interaction to the point of removing your weapon without probable cause and without any legal justification." "Agent," Whitfield said quietly, and there was something almost like apology in his voice, even if there was also something like cowardice. "I didn't call for the escalation." Marcus did not respond to this. He did not absolve Whitfield of responsibility. He simply waited. It took another 5 minutes before Tolliver said, "You're free to go," and another 3 minutes after that before Marcus removed his hands from the hood and walked back to his car and got into the driver's seat next to Diana. She did not say anything. He put the car in drive and pulled back onto Route 22 very carefully, at the exact speed limit. Diana stared out the window. The pines along the road were dark. The night was dark. The drive home was usually a quiet drive, the kind where the two of them could sit without speaking and not have it be uncomfortable. This was not quiet. This was the silence of someone who had just watched her husband's hand go to his badge because that was the only thing that had made the difference. And they both understood what that meant. They both understood what it meant that he was a federal agent and that it mattered. They both understood what it meant for the thousands of people on the same road who did not have a badge to show, who did not have credentials to pull out, who just had their compliance and their stillness and their careful adherence to the speed limit, and none of it would matter because they did not have the specific power to make Tolliver's consequences complicated. They drove home on Route 22. Diana turned the radio back on, very quietly. Marcus kept his eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel and his speed at exactly 45 miles per hour. They did not speak until they were home. And even then, the words were sparse and careful, like they were trying to restore something that had been fundamentally altered, as if they could sand down the sharp edge of the evening by being gentle enough in the aftermath. But they both knew that some things, once they are broken, do not sand down. They remain broken. The only question is whether you let the broken thing define the shape of your future or whether you insist on reshaping it despite the damage. Neither of them knew. On that Friday night on Route 22, what the answer to that question was going to be, Marcus did not call his supervisor that night. He drove home, and he and Diana sat in the driveway for 13 minutes without speaking. The engine off, the house dark in front of them. And then they went inside and went to bed and lay in the dark for approximately 47 minutes before either of them even pretended to sleep. What he did call was Special Agent Patricia Harmon. Patricia worked in the FBI's Civil Rights Division, Maryland Field Office, and she was not Marcus's subordinate. She was his equal in rank and his superior in civil rights law, which meant that when Marcus called her at 11:58 p.m. on a Friday night and said, "I need you to document something," she did not ask him if it could wait until Monday. She asked him where he was and what had happened, and then she listened while he described the entire interaction with a precision that matched the precision of his 44 miles per hour. "Did he touch you?" Patricia asked. "No," Marcus said. "Did he explicitly threaten you?" "He put his hand on his weapon and did not remove it," Marcus said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I'm calling this a civil rights incident. I'm coming to the scene. Are you still there?" "No," Marcus said. We went home. Can you go back? Marcus looked at Diana. Diana was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she was nodding, which meant she understood what going back meant, which meant that she was already moving past the part of the evening where she could pretend this was something you could just absorb and continue from. Yeah, Marcus said. We can go back, Patricia said. I'm getting in the car. Stay on the line. So Marcus stayed on the line. He and Diana got back into their car, and they drove back to Route 22, and they parked approximately where they had been pulled over, and they waited. Patricia arrived in a civilian sedan at 12:36 a.m., and she was wearing jeans and a windbreaker that said FBI in reflective letters on the back. She parked behind them and got out of the car and approached Marcus's window, which he had rolled down the moment she appeared. Tell me everything, Patricia said. Start from the moment you saw the lights, Marcus told her. Diana added details, the way Tolliver had asked about their business in Pine Ridge. The tone of his voice when he had demanded Marcus step out of the vehicle, the moment when he had put his hand on his weapon. Patricia took notes. She did not record this conversation, but she did not need to because she was precisely trained in the transfer of experience into documentation. And when she finished taking her notes, she said, "This is a pattern." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Patricia was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the road, at the darkness, at the pines that lined Route 22, the way they probably lined it in 1963, and the way they probably would line it in 2063 if anyone was still stopping people on the side of the road for going 1 mile per hour below the speed limit. "Tolliver," Patricia said. "Derek Tolliver, right?" "Right," Marcus said. "Give me until tomorrow. I'm going to run a pattern analysis. I'm going to look at who he has stopped, what he has seized, what complaints have been filed. If there's something here, I will find it. I'm not the victim," Marcus said. "The badge protected me. I have resources. I have institutional power." "I know," Patricia said. "That's exactly why this matters. Because what he did to you, he has probably done to other people who did not have the badge. And those people are in a much different position to fight back." She was right. Marcus knew she was right. He had known she was right the moment she said it. The way you know something is right, the way you know that gravity is right. Not because you have to be convinced, but because you have lived inside that knowledge your whole life. Patricia drove back to the Baltimore field office and spent the rest of the night doing a pattern analysis on Derek Tolliver. By 8 o'clock in the morning, she had found 23 stops conducted by Tolliver in the past 18 months that fit a profile, individual or family with cash in the vehicle. No drugs found, no contraband located, but the cash seized anyway under civil asset forfeiture statutes. 23 stops. The amounts ranged from $847 to $6,200. The total seized was approximately $74,000. $74,000 that had been removed from the vehicles and the lives and the futures of people who did not have the resources or the institutional power to fight back. One of those people was named Raymond Okafor. Raymond Okafor was a logistics manager at a regional distribution warehouse. He was 38 years old. He had a daughter named Amara, who was 12 years old and who wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist. 3 weeks before Marcus and Diana's anniversary dinner, Raymond had been pulled over by Derek Tolliver on Route 22. Raymond had been carrying $3,400 in cash. He had withdrawn the money from his bank account to pay for a series of medical tests for Amara. Tests that the insurance company had deemed non-critical, but that Amara's doctor had recommended. Tests that required upfront payment before they could be scheduled. Derek Tolliver had seized the cash. He had told Raymond that the money was suspected to be drug proceeds and would be returned pending investigation. The investigation had never happened. The money had never been returned. Raymond had filed a complaint with the Pine Ridge Police Department. The complaint had been filed into a system that did not particularly want to process it, and it had arrived at a desk that did not particularly want to deal with it. And it had sat there for 3 weeks while Raymond tried to figure out how to tell his daughter that the tests she needed would have to wait, because a police officer had decided that his cash was suspicious based on the specific suspicion that came with seeing a black man with money and the assumption that you did not have a legal reason to carry it. Patricia found the report of his complaint in the system. She found the photographs of the seized cash. She found the notation that said, "Investigation pending," with a date that suggested no investigation had occurred at any point in the 3 weeks since the seizure. She then did something that was within her authority, but that required her to understand the specific political landscape of Pine Ridge, Maryland, which was a town where the mayor, Gordon Fitch, had a significant interest in maintaining the revenue streams that civil asset forfeiture created. She got a warrant. She got a warrant to examine the Pine Ridge Police Department's financial records related to civil asset forfeiture. She got a warrant to examine the seized cash and the documentation related to the seizures. She got a warrant to examine Derek Tolliver's personal cell phone records for the month of September. What she found, when she examined those records, was a call. It was a call from Mayor Gordon Fitch's personal cell phone to Derek Tolliver's personal cell phone. The call had been placed at 9:47 p.m. on Friday, September 23rd, 90 minutes before Tolliver's night shift began. 90 minutes before Marcus and Diana Cole's car appeared on Route 22. The call lasted 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Patricia sat at her desk and looked at this call, and she understood that what she was looking at was not a speeding stop. What she was looking at was something deliberate. What she was looking at was a mayor calling a police officer 90 minutes before his shift, and then that police officer pulling over a black man and his wife on a road where he had been constructing a pattern of illegal seizures for 18 months. And the only difference between this stop and the others was that this time the victim was a federal agent. She called Marcus at 2:17 p.m. on Saturday. "We need to meet," she said. "Not on the phone, not in text, in person. Are you available?" Marcus was available. He was at home, and Diana was at home. And they had spent the better part of the day pretending that the previous night had not happened, and doing very badly at it. When Patricia called, Diana asked where he was going, and Marcus said, "Civil rights, meeting with Harmon." And Diana nodded and did not ask him anything else. They met at a federal building coffee shop. Patricia came with a file, and she did not open it immediately. She sat down and ordered tea and did not say anything for approximately 30 seconds, which is a long time in the context of a meeting that is about something this serious. "I found a pattern," Patricia said finally. "I found 23 stops. I found approximately $74,000 in seized cash, and I found a call." She opened the file. She showed Marcus the call from Fitch's phone to Tolliver's phone. She explained the timing. She explained what it suggested. "The mayor called him," Marcus said. It was not a question. "The mayor called him," Patricia confirmed. 90 minutes before his shift. The stop happened 92 minutes after the call began. "You think the mayor was specifically asking him to stop me?" Marcus asked. "I think the mayor was specifically asking him to pull over a black man driving on Route 22. Patricia said, and Tolliver complied. The fact that the black man driving on Route 22 was you is actually the least important detail in this equation. From the perspective of what actually happened, but it becomes the most important detail from the perspective of what we can prove. Marcus understood this. He understood that his badge was both irrelevant and essential, that it proved the illegality of the stop by removing the one detail that Tolliver might have constructed into reasonable suspicion, and that without it, Raymond Okafor's complaint would still be sitting in a file that no one was reading. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked. "I need you to file a complaint," Patricia said. "I need it official. I need it formal. I need it documented. And then I need you to let me do my job." "What about Okafor?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to return his money," Patricia said. "All of it, plus interest, plus damages. I'm going to build a civil rights case so airtight that the department will have no choice but to settle. But I'm going to need the mayor's phone call to stay confidential until the right moment. Understand?" Marcus understood. He understood that what Patricia was doing was building a structure, and that if he understood the structure, he could not inadvertently collapse it by mentioning it to the wrong person, or the right person at the wrong time. "Okay," Marcus said. "And there's something else," Patricia said. She pulled out another document. It was a photograph of a police cruiser parked outside of Pine Ridge Police Department. The officer standing next to it was young, maybe mid-20s, Hispanic, with the kind of face that suggested he was still trying to decide what he was. "That's Officer Carlos Reyes," Patricia said. 2 years on the force, assigned to night shift for the past 6 months. He was Tolliver's backup on 5 of the 23 stops that appear in the pattern. "You think he'll cooperate?" Marcus asked. "I think he hasn't decided what kind of cop he is yet," Patricia said. "Which means he's either going to become the kind of cop who looks away, or he's going to become the kind of cop who speaks up. The stop that happened to you might be the moment that forces his decision. But I can't force it. He has to choose it himself." Marcus nodded. He understood that too. He understood that there were people in the system who had not yet locked themselves into the wrong side of history, and that those people were valuable because they still had the capacity to choose something different. "When?" Marcus asked. "The complaint comes first. Patricia said, you file it Monday. Then I start the investigation formally. Then, if everything goes the way I think it's going to go, we'll reach out to Reyes. But not yet. Not until we have the structure in place." "And the mayor?" Marcus asked. "The mayor is going to be the last person to understand that he's the problem," Patricia said. "Which gives us time." Marcus left the meeting and drove home, and Diana was waiting for him. And he told her what Patricia had found, and Diana listened and did not say anything for a long moment, and then said, "This is bigger than us now." "Yeah," Marcus said. "That doesn't make it better." Diana said, "It actually makes it worse, in some ways, because now we can't just absorb it. Now it's a thing that has to go somewhere." "I know," Marcus said, "but it also means it matters." Diana said, "What happened to you matters because it proves that what happened to the other people was real. That matters." Marcus filed his complaint on Monday. He filed it with the Pine Ridge Police Department, and he filed it with the Maryland State Police, and he filed it with the FBI's Internal Review Bureau. He documented the exact time of the stop, the exact speed he had been traveling, the exact moment when Tolliver's hand had gone to his weapon. He documented Diana's presence and her observations. He documented the fact that he had not been speeding, and that he had complied with every command, and that he had been threatened with arrest for reasons that had no legal basis. The complaint was formal. The complaint was precise. The complaint was in the context of the greater pattern that Patricia was beginning to construct, the beginning of the end for Derek Tolliver and the specific ecosystem of corruption that had allowed him to operate for 18 months without significant consequence. But none of that was visible yet. All that was visible on Monday morning was a complaint sitting in a system that had already proven its capacity to ignore complaints. The first 48 hours after a complaint is filed are like the space between a lightning strike and the thunder, full of activity that is not yet visible to the people who are not looking in the right direction. Patricia Harmon was looking in the right direction. She was in the federal building, and she had expanded her investigation team to include 2 other agents, and she was building what she called the architecture of consequence. This meant examining every financial record, every seized vehicle, every cash seizure, every complaint that had been filed and ignored. It meant building a timeline. It meant understanding not just what Tolliver had done, but how he had been permitted to do it, and who had been looking away while he did it, and who had been actively facilitating it. Mayor Gordon Fitch had been doing both. He had been looking away, and he had been facilitating. The call to Tolliver on September 23rd suggested that he was actively directing the operations now, which meant that the scope of the investigation had just expanded from an individual officer to a conspiracy involving the highest elected official in the town. Patricia called Marcus on Tuesday morning and said, "We've got something." "Tell me," Marcus said. "The mayor kept a record," Patricia said. "He maintained a spreadsheet. It wasn't on his city computer. He was smarter than that, but it was on his personal phone, backed up to a cloud account, the seizure amounts, the dates, the officers involved, and most importantly, the distribution of the seized funds." "Distribution?" Marcus asked. "The money wasn't staying in the department," Patricia said. "It was being distributed, partially to an account that appears to be the mayor's, partially to other accounts we're still tracing. But the pattern is clear. This is not about law enforcement. This is about a revenue extraction operation." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Raymond Okafor, who had been told that his daughter's medical money was suspected to be drug proceeds. He was thinking about what that meant if the mayor had already decided that the money was going to be seized before Tolliver ever pulled him over. "We're going to need to move carefully," Patricia said. "The mayor has connections. He has lawyers. He has the kind of influence that a 2-term mayor of a suburban community develops. But he also made a mistake." "What mistake?" Marcus asked. "He documented it," Patricia said. "He created the evidence of his own conspiracy. He thought encryption and cloud accounts and the complexity of the system would protect him. But what it actually did was create a record that doesn't lie, that can't be explained away, that doesn't depend on human testimony." "When?" Marcus asked. "We're moving through the legal process right now." Patricia said, "Warrants, subpoenas, the proper chain of evidence. It needs to be perfect. I'm not interested in arresting the mayor and then having it get thrown out because we took a shortcut. I want him in a courtroom, and I want the evidence to be so clear that the only question is how long he spends in federal prison." "And Tolliver?" Marcus asked. "Tolliver is a smaller problem," Patricia said. "Tolliver will cooperate. He will flip on the mayor because Tolliver's career is done anyway. And the only calculation that matters to him is whether he cooperates or not. Either way, the thing that Tolliver built, the pattern of illegal seizures, the predatory relationship with people driving on Route 22, that thing is going to be dismantled." Marcus wanted to feel more satisfied by this. He wanted to feel like the machinery of justice was turning in the right direction. But what he mostly felt was tired. The way you feel tired when you realize that the system that is supposed to protect people is actually the system that required you to be a federal agent in order to be protected from it. Diana was at work. She was in her office at the civil engineering firm, and she was pretending that the past 3 days had not happened. which meant she was doing very well at her job, because her job required the specific kind of focus that came from trying not to think about anything else. At 11 a.m. on Tuesday, her assistant knocked on her door and said, "There's someone here to see you. Says it's important." The person was Officer Carlos Reyes. He was in civilian clothes, and he looked like a man who had not slept much, and he was asking if they could talk somewhere private. Diana brought him into her office and closed the door and said, "This is about my husband." It was not a question. "Yes," Reyes said. He sat down. He did not sit like a police officer sits, with the specific posture of someone trained to react to threat. He sat like a man who was tired of carrying something and did not know where to put it down. "I was on the other 4 stops," Reyes said. "The 4 seizures before the one with your husband. I was there. I watched Tolliver take people's money, and I did not do anything about it." Diana did not say anything. She waited. "I'm going to cooperate," Reyes said. "I'm going to go to the federal agent, Patricia Harmon, and I'm going to tell her everything I saw. I'm going to explain the pattern. I'm going to testify, but I wanted you to know first. I wanted your husband to know first. I wanted to apologize." Diana was looking at this young officer, and she was seeing someone who had arrived at the edge of a choice and was making the difficult choice, and knew that the cost of making it was going to be significant. "Why?" Diana asked. "Because what happened to your husband could have been a lot worse," Reyes said. "And the only thing that stopped it from being worse was that he had a badge, and I realized that's not acceptable. That's not justice. That's just luck." Diana called Marcus immediately. Marcus was at the federal building, and he was in a meeting with Patricia about the timeline of the Fitch investigation, and he stepped out to take the call. Diana told him what Reyes had said. "Don't let him talk to the media," Patricia said, when Marcus told her. "Don't let him do a press conference. Don't let him do anything public until after the trial. His testimony is the most valuable thing we have. And I need him to be a surprise witness, not a headline." So they protected Reyes. They did not publicize his cooperation. They did not let it become a story until the moment came when his story needed to be told. What did become a story was Raymond Okafor. On Wednesday morning, Patricia showed up at Raymond's apartment with a check. The check was for $3,400, plus 9 months of interest, plus damages. It was for $7,200. Raymond opened the door and looked at the check and did not understand what he was looking at. Patricia explained. She explained about Marcus and Diana. She explained about the pattern. She explained about the investigation. She explained that the money he had been carrying, the money his daughter needed, was being returned, and he was being made whole, and the man who had taken it was going to be prosecuted. Raymond sat down. He did not sit like someone who had just been compensated. He sat like someone who had just been permitted to feel something he had not been permitted to feel in 9 months. "What do I have to do?" Raymond asked. "You testify," Patricia said. "At the trial, you explain what happened, what that money was for, what it cost you to lose it. You tell the truth, that's all." "Is that all?" Raymond asked. And there was something in his voice that suggested he understood that testifying against a police officer and a mayor in a small town was not actually a small thing. "That's all," Patricia said. "And you get to tell your daughter that the tests she needs can happen now. You get to go back to work and not spend every evening trying to figure out how to explain to a 12-year-old that the system doesn't protect people like her." Raymond looked at the check again. It was the amount of money he had been owed. It was exactly the amount of his loss. It did not repair the 9 months of worrying It did not give back the time he had spent trying to figure out what to do. But it was something, it was the system, finally acknowledging that wrong had been done. The news of the settlement leaked within 2 days. A clerk at the federal building mentioned it to someone at the courthouse, and someone at the courthouse mentioned it to someone at the Pine Ridge Police Department, and someone at the police department mentioned it to someone at the mayor's office. And by Thursday afternoon, Mayor Gordon Fitch knew that his operation was being dismantled. What he did not know was how much evidence Patricia had collected. What he did not know was about the spreadsheet. What he did not know was that his own documentation was going to be what convicted him. Judge Harold Beckett, who had been rubber stamping Tolliver's civil asset forfeiture requests for the past 4 years, received a phone call from the mayor on Thursday evening. The call was social, or appeared to be. The judge and the mayor golfed together every other Saturday. They belonged to the same country club. They had been in the business of maintaining Pine Ridge's specific character together, which meant maintaining the systems that served people like them and incidentally served to extract resources from people who looked like Raymond Okafor and Marcus and Diana Cole. But even judges who have decided to look away cannot look away forever. Even judges who have rubber-stamped documents for 4 years understand, when the federal government gets involved, that the rubber-stamping days are over. By Friday morning, Judge Beckett had lawyered up. He was not going to be indicted. His rubber stamping had been stupid and immoral, but possibly technically legal, which meant that a prosecutor trying to prove criminal intent would have to work harder than Patricia was willing to work when she already had the mayor and Tolliver dead to rights. Patricia called Marcus and said, "It's time." It was time for the arrest warrants. It was time for the charges. It was time for the machinery of justice to become visible to the people who had been operating inside it as if they were untouchable. Derek Tolliver was arrested on Friday morning as he was arriving for his night shift. He was dressed in his uniform, and he was told he was under arrest for civil rights violations, conspiracy, and corruption. And he understood, in the moment he was read his rights, that the specific ecosystem of protection that he had been operating inside was no longer available to him. Mayor Gordon Fitch was arrested at his office. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus made in a month, and he was being told that he was under arrest for conspiracy to commit civil rights violations and money laundering. The mayor tried to call his lawyer as soon as he was read his rights, but the lawyer was already at the FBI field office, having been contacted by Patricia that morning with an explanation of what was coming. The news broke on Friday afternoon. Local news first, then regional, then national. A story about a police officer who had been conducting an illegal operation in a small suburban town. A story about a mayor who had been directing it. A story about an assistant special agent in charge who had been pulled over on his way home from his anniversary dinner and had documented it. Marcus's name was in every report. His badge was in every report. His marriage to Diana was mentioned. The fact that he was driving at exactly 44 miles per hour was mentioned. What was not mentioned, because Patricia had asked the press to withhold it, was that Raymond Okafor had lost his daughter's medical money. That was the story that would come out at trial. That afternoon, Diana called Marcus and said, "We should go home. Everyone's going to be calling. Everyone's going to want to know what we're thinking. We should just go home." Marcus left the federal building at 4 p.m. He drove home on Route 22. He did not take a detour. He drove straight through, at the posted speed limit, and he did not look at the mile marker where he had been stopped 3 days earlier. He just drove home, and Diana was waiting for him, and they closed the door, and they stopped answering their phones. By late Friday evening, the news cycles were in full rotation. Pine Ridge, a town that had been known for safe neighborhoods and good schools, was now known for police corruption and mayoral conspiracy. The police chief was calling for a review of all civil asset forfeiture cases going back 5 years. The city council was calling for resignations. The people of Pine Ridge were discovering that the systems they had trusted to protect them had been the systems that were extracting from them, and they were not sure what to do with that information. What they did not yet know was that the trial would be very specific, very detailed, and very much about a young officer who had made a choice. The federal investigation proceeded with the specific momentum that comes from having both the culprits and the evidence clearly documented. Derek Tolliver's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. The lawyer understood that the case against his client was airtight, that the pattern was clear, that the seizures were documented, and that the only calculation that mattered was whether Tolliver cooperated or spent significant time in federal prison. Tolliver chose cooperation. Within the week, he had given statements to Patricia's team. He had explained which seizures had been coordinated with the mayor. He had explained which seizures had been conducted on Fitch's direction. He had explained the phone call on September 23rd, the call that had come 90 minutes before his shift. The call that had been about the black man driving a BMW who would be coming through Route 22 that night. The call that had included specific instructions to stop him, to find probable cause if it did not exist, to document the stop in a way that would be defensible if questioned. The mayor had literally called him and told him to pull over a specific vehicle and a specific driver. Mayor Fitch's lawyer negotiated more slowly. Fitch had more resources. Fitch had more connections. Fitch believed, for approximately 3 days, that he might be able to avoid conviction. But when Patricia showed him the spreadsheet, his own personal documentation of the operation, his own handwriting, his own entries about the amount seized and the accounts where money had been deposited, his lawyer advised him to negotiate a deal. The deal was federal prison time. The deal was restitution. The deal was cooperation. The deal was admitting that what he had done was wrong, and that it had been done deliberately, and that it had been done in service of extracting resources from people who did not have the power to resist. What happened next was the part that Patricia had been building toward since the moment she realized that the phone call existed. She called Marcus and said, "I need you to listen to something." She sent him an audio file. It was the phone call from Fitch to Tolliver. It was the conversation that had changed everything. It was 4 minutes and 23 seconds of a mayor telling a police officer to find a reason to pull over a specific vehicle that would be on Route 22 at a specific time that night. Marcus listened to it. He listened to Fitch's voice, calm and professional, asking Tolliver if he was ready to handle the situation on Route 22 tonight. He listened to Tolliver saying yes. He listened to Fitch explaining that there was a specific vehicle I need you to stop, and that he should find what you need to find on the vehicle. He listened to Tolliver asking if there was anything specific to look for, and Fitch saying, "Just handle it the way you have been handling the others. Find the cash. Find the cash." The casual command to extract money from a person driving on a road the mayor owned, in the sense that he had orchestrated the operation on it. Marcus listened to the whole thing, and then he called Diana and played it for her. And Diana listened and did not say anything for a long moment, and then said, "Play it again." Marcus played it again. "That was us," Diana said. "That call was about us. That money was supposed to be about us." "Yes," Marcus said. "He didn't know you were FBI," Diana said. "No," Marcus said. "He knew a black couple would be driving home late. That's what he knew. That's what mattered to him." Diana sat with this for a moment. She was understanding, in real time, that what had happened on Route 22 had not been random. It had not been a bad interaction that happened to occur. It had been deliberate. It had been orchestrated. It had been a mayor calling a police officer, asking him to extract money from black people driving through his town. "I want the audio released," Diana said. "Not yet," Patricia had told Marcus when he called her. "At trial, we release it at trial. That's when it has the most impact. That's when people understand that this was not about one bad officer. This was about a system." So they did not release it. They let the audio sit, and they let the case proceed, and they waited for the moment when releasing it would matter most. What they did release was information about the pattern. The prosecutors filed court documents listing all 23 stops. They listed all the people who had been stopped. They listed all the money that had been seized. Raymond Okafor's case was included, but his daughter's medical money was not the focus. The focus was the fact that he had been one of 23 victims of a patterned operation. And the operation had been deliberate, and it had been directed from the mayor's office. The press picked up on this. They started reaching out to the other victims. They started contacting people whose money had been taken. They started telling the stories of 18 months of extraction. One of those people called Patricia directly. Her name was Dr. Sarah Patterson. She was a physician in Baltimore. She had been pulled over on Route 22 while returning from a medical conference on a Sunday afternoon. She had $2,400 in cash in her vehicle, money she had withdrawn to pay a parking fee for a conference hotel that only accepted cash, a detail that the police report did not include. Tolliver had seized the cash, told her it was suspected drug proceeds, and she had received notice 3 weeks later that the investigation had found no evidence of drug activity and that she was entitled to a hearing to request the return of her funds. The hearing had taken place 6 months ago. Judge Beckett had presided. Judge Beckett had ruled that The verdict rippled through Pine Ridge like something that had moved beneath the surface and was now visible on top of it. The people of the town had a choice to make. They could acknowledge what had happened and try to understand it, or they could dismiss it as the actions of a few bad actors and pretend that the systems that had produced those actors were still intact. Most of Pine Ridge chose acknowledgement. The police chief, who had already called for a review of all civil asset forfeiture cases, now implemented a new policy. No civil asset forfeiture could occur without explicit written evidence of suspected criminal activity. No cash could be seized based on profile, suspicion, or instinct. No officer could conduct a traffic stop based on the race of the driver. These were policies that should have been in place from the beginning, but they were in place now. The police department conducted an internal review of the previous 5 years. They identified cases where civil asset forfeiture had been conducted without proper probable cause. They identified cases where the pattern suggested that race had been a factor in the decision to stop. They identified 43 cases total, 43 people who had been stopped, searched, or had money seized. Of those 43 cases, 23 had been part of Tolliver's pattern. 12 had been conducted by other officers who had been following Tolliver's lead, who had understood that the system would rubber stamp their decisions, and who had participated in that system. 8 cases were borderline. They might have been legitimate law enforcement, or they might have been predatory extraction. The department decided to err on the side of victims. All 43 cases received restitution offers. The city council moved to remove Judge Beckett's cases from the record. They did not charge him with anything. That would have required proving criminal intent, and the city did not want to undertake that prosecution. But they removed his name from the cases he had presided over. They reassigned them to other judges. They effectively erased his presence from Pine Ridge's judicial system, which was perhaps a better punishment than prison would have been, because it was the public acknowledgement that he had been on the wrong side of history. Mayor Fitch's position was assumed by the city's deputy mayor, who immediately called for a comprehensive review of all municipal spending. She discovered that the civil asset forfeiture operation had generated approximately $180,000 in revenue that had been diverted to accounts that had no clear public purpose. She traced that money. She found that some of it had gone to improve the golf course at the country club where Fitch and Beckett had golfed together. She found that some of it had been used to fund private security for the mayor's home. She found that some of it had simply disappeared into accounts that appeared to be personal accounts. She reported all of this. She did not protect Fitch. She did not protect any of the people who had been involved in the operation. She simply told the truth about where the money had gone. The country club responded to the scandal by removing both Fitch and Beckett from membership. This was significant because membership in the country club was not just about golf. It was about belonging to the specific class of people who ran Pine Ridge. By removing them, the club was saying publicly that they had made a choice they could not stand by. It was not redemption, it was acknowledgement. What happened in the courthouse was more complex. The federal government required that Pine Ridge sign a consent decree. This was not a punishment. It was a corrective measure. The consent decree meant that the police department would be subject to federal oversight for 5 years. It meant that all traffic stops would be recorded. It meant that all searches would be documented. It meant that the practices that had allowed Tolliver to operate would be dismantled systematically, with federal agents monitoring to make sure the dismantling actually happened. The police department did not like the consent decree. The officers understood that it meant less autonomy, more scrutiny, more questions about how they were doing their jobs. But they also understood that the alternative was worse. The alternative was an operation that extracted money from people, that was run by the mayor, and that was designed to prey on people based on their race. Officer Tolliver's shift went to a younger officer, someone who had not been part of the old system, someone who was young enough that they had not yet decided what kind of officer to be. That officer's first assignment under the consent decree was to conduct a traffic stop that was recorded and documented, and to follow every procedure correctly, and to understand that the federal government was watching. Officer Whitfield, the older officer who had been Tolliver's backup on the stops, had a choice to make. He could retire, or he could try to become the kind of officer the department was trying to be under the consent decree. He retired. He took his pension and his specific knowledge of which rules to follow and which rules to ignore, and he left the department. He went to work as a private security consultant. He did not speak to the media about his role in the operation. He did not explain his complicity. He simply removed himself from the system. Officer Carlos Reyes stayed at the state police barracks in Annapolis. He worked day shift. He conducted traffic stops in a jurisdiction that was not Pine Ridge, with oversight that was not the old Pine Ridge Police Department's oversight. He did his job correctly, and no one questioned his competence because he was competent, and no one questioned his ethics because his ethics were clearly in the right place. After a year, Reyes received a commendation for his testimony in the case. It was a state police commendation, not a federal commendation, but it was an acknowledgement that his choice to speak had mattered. What happened to Marcus and Diana was different. They received calls from news organizations wanting to tell their story. They received interview requests from national media. They received a book deal offer. They were asked to speak at law schools and police academies and civil rights conferences. Diana said no to most of it. She went back to work. She returned to her civil engineering firm, and she continued designing infrastructure, and she did not become a spokesperson for civil rights issues. But she did do one thing. She volunteered to help train police departments in implicit bias. She did presentations for law enforcement officers about how the patterns they might not even be aware of could become systems of extraction. She did this work not because it was her job, but because she understood something about systems that came from her professional background. Marcus said yes to some of it and no to some of it. He continued working for the FBI. He was promoted to special agent in charge of the Violent Crimes and Public Corruption Task Force in the Mid-Atlantic region, which meant he had authority over the precise work that Patricia Harmon had done on the Pine Ridge case. He used his position to prioritize civil rights investigations. He made sure that cases like Tolliver's were taken seriously. He made sure that operations like Fitch's were dismantled before they could grow large. But he also He gave interviews about what had happened on Route 22. He spoke about his father, who had been pulled over 11 times in 1 year. He spoke about how the systems that were supposed to protect people were often the systems that extracted from them. He spoke about the specific moment when Patricia had played him the phone call and he had understood that what had happened to him had been deliberate, that he had not been randomly stopped, but that a mayor had called a police officer and asked him to find a probable cause where none existed. These talks were not triumphalist. Marcus did not speak about the trial as if it had solved anything. He spoke about the trial as evidence that the system could be forced to acknowledge when it was wrong, if someone was willing to push hard enough and had the resources to push. He spoke about Raymond Okafor, who had lost his daughter's medical money. He spoke about Dr. Patterson, who had been seized without cause. He spoke about the 43 victims in the expanded pattern, most of whom would never have received restitution if Patricia Harmon had not decided to investigate. The truth about what happened in Pine Ridge was that it was not a story about redemption. It was a story about accountability forced through evidence and legal action, about a system that was designed to extract from people but could be made to stop extracting if people with power and resources were willing to push back. Raymond Okafor used the restitution money to pay for Amara's tests. The tests showed that her heart was healthy, that the elevated markers her doctor had been concerned about were nothing serious, that there was nothing wrong. But at least they had checked. At least they had done the work. At least Amara was not spending her childhood wondering if something was wrong with her, if something was broken that no one was helping her fix. She went back to school. She continued working toward becoming a pediatric cardiologist. She did a presentation about her experience for her middle school class, not as a victim, but as someone who understood something about systems and barriers and the specific moment when people with power acknowledge that they have used that power incorrectly. The Pine Ridge Police Department, under the consent decree, conducted a hiring review. They determined that Derek Tolliver had shown certain patterns in his behavior before the civil asset forfeiture operation, patterns of escalation, patterns of making assumptions about guilt, patterns of using authority as an extension of personal will rather than as a tool for public safety. These patterns should have been caught during his hiring process. These patterns should have been addressed during his evaluation. But they had not been. They had been permitted to develop, and they had been permitted to grow. And they had been permitted to become a system that extracted money from people on Route 22 for 18 months. The department implemented new screening procedures. They brought in independent evaluators to assess officer candidates. They created a system for addressing behavioral concerns before they became operational problems. They did the work that should have been done before Tolliver was hired. And they did it without needing to be sued or forced by external investigation. The work of dismantling the system was slow. The work of rebuilding the system was slower. But the acknowledgement that something had been wrong, that acknowledgement happened immediately, 3 months after the verdict. Patricia Harmon received a call from a woman named Elena Vasquez. Elena had been stopped by Derek Tolliver on Route 22 on a Tuesday evening in March of the previous year. She had been carrying $5,600 in cash, money she had withdrawn from her bank account to pay her rent while her landlord was transitioning to a new payment system and did not yet accept electronic transfers. Tolliver had seized the cash. He had told Elena it was suspected drug proceeds. Elena had filed a complaint. The complaint had sat in the system. Elena had gone to work every day knowing that her money was missing, knowing that her rent was due, knowing that the person who had taken the money worked for the city and was protected by it. Now Elena wanted to know about the restitution. She had heard about the trial. She wanted to know if she was going to be compensated. Patricia told her yes. Elena was going to be compensated. Elena was going to receive her $5,600 back, plus interest, plus damages. Elena asked how long it would take. Patricia said the paperwork was being processed, and she expected the restitution to be authorized within 2 weeks. Elena started crying. Patricia did not try to comfort her. Patricia did not say that everything was going to be okay. Patricia simply stayed on the phone while Elena cried and then said, "I'm going to personally make sure that check is processed. You're going to have your money." The check was processed within 2 weeks. Elena received it while she was at work. She opened the envelope at her desk, and she looked at the amount, and she understood that the system had finally acknowledged what had been taken from her. What she did with the money was remarkable, not because it was spectacular, but because it was ordinary. She paid her rent. She paid her late utilities. As she paid the overdraft fees that had accumulated while her account was short. She paid the interest on a small credit card debt that she had taken on because she did not have the cash to pay for a minor car repair. The money did not transform her life. The money restored her to the position she had been in before the seizure. The money was not charity. The money was an acknowledgement of what had been taken. But to Elena, who had spent the 9 months between the seizure and the restitution making decisions about which bills to pay and which bills to defer, the money felt like everything. Other people used their restitution money differently. Doctor Patterson used hers to take a sabbatical. She spent 3 months traveling and thinking about what kind of doctor she wanted to be going forward. She came back from her sabbatical with a new focus. She decided to specialize in treating underserved populations. She did this not as penance, but as acknowledgement that access to healthcare was distributed unequally, and she wanted to work on the side of people who had less access. Raymond Okafor used the restitution to set up a college fund for Amara. The amount was not enough to cover 4 years of undergraduate education, but it was enough to demonstrate to his daughter that the loss had been reversed and that the future was not constrained by what had been taken from her in the past. The total amount of restitution distributed was approximately $180,000, the amount that had been seized, plus interest, plus damages to the 43 victims who had been identified. This was the money that had been extracted from people driving on Route 22, money that was supposed to be evidence in criminal investigations but was actually just money taken from people. Money that had been diverted to accounts and used for purposes that had nothing to do with law enforcement. The restitution came from several sources. The city of Pine Ridge paid part of it, the part that the mayor's office had discretion over. The Pine Ridge Police Department paid part of it, the part that had been diverted from the Civil Asset Forfeiture Fund. Mayor Fitch himself paid part of it from assets that were seized as part of the sentencing. His personal accounts, his property, the specific components of his wealth that the federal court determined should be redistributed to his victims. The remaining amount came from the federal government, which took the position that civil rights violations conducted by local law enforcement were a federal responsibility if the federal government was going to investigate them. None of the restitution was enough. None of it restored the time that had been lost, the worry that had consumed people's lives, the specific damage that comes from understanding that the system that was supposed to protect you was actually designed to extract from you. But it was something. What happened next was the slower work of rebuilding institutional trust. The Pine Ridge Police Department, under the federal consent decree, had to demonstrate that they had implemented the changes required. They had to show that they were training officers differently, hiring officers differently, supervising officers differently. The federal monitor assigned to oversee the consent decree was named Dr. James Mitchell. He was a retired police captain who had spent 15 years after his retirement teaching courses on police ethics and institutional accountability. He was not there to punish the Pine Ridge Police Department. He was there to make sure that they understood what needed to change, and actually changed it. Doctor Mitchell spent his first month interviewing officers. He asked them about their understanding of civil rights. He asked them about their perception of community trust. He asked them about the specific mechanisms that had allowed Tolliver to operate without significant oversight. What he found was that most of the officers understood, intellectually, that what Tolliver had done was wrong, but they did not understand the mechanism of it. They did not understand how a system of rubber-stamping judges and a mayor who diverted assets and an organizational culture of not asking questions could create an environment where extracting money from people became a normal practice. Dr. Mitchell created a curriculum. The curriculum was not about abstract civil rights theory. The curriculum was about what had happened on Route 22. The curriculum used the trial transcript, the phone call, the testimony of Reyes and the victims, to walk officers through the specific moment-by-moment choices that had allowed the system to function. He showed them the phone call. He played Fitch's voice for them. Just handle it the way you have been handling the others. Find the cash." He asked them, "At what moment would you have spoken up? At what moment would you have said no?" Most of the officers could identify a moment. Most of them understood, when confronted with the specificity of what had happened, that they would not have participated in what Tolliver was doing. But most of them also understood that there was a culture in the department that discouraged asking questions, and that culture had to change. The police chief, who had been in the job for 7 years and had not known about Tolliver's operation, decided to implement monthly review meetings where officers could bring concerns about illegal or unethical conduct. The meetings were voluntary, but they were attended. Officers brought situations. Officers described moments when they were asked to do things that seemed questionable. Officers asked for guidance on how to handle those moments without compromising their career or their safety. The culture did not change overnight, but it began to change. Officer James Whitfield, who had retired rather than adapt to the new system, was not part of this change. But his absence was, in some way, also part of the change. His departure was an acknowledgement that the old ways of operating were not compatible with the new standards the department was trying to establish. Officer Carlos Reyes, working at the state police barracks in Annapolis, became someone that the Pine Ridge Police Department consulted when they had questions about how to handle the transition. Reyes was willing to talk to them about what he had seen, what he had participated in, what he had chosen to acknowledge. His willingness to help was an act of reconciliation, not absolution, but acknowledgement that he had been part of the problem and was now part of the solution. What happened with Judge Harold Beckett was that he continued to practice law in Pine Ridge, but he was never offered the option to return to the bench. His cases were reassigned. His presence was effectively removed from the judicial system. He spent the rest of his career as a lawyer for private clients, never again in a position to rubber stamp anything, never again in a position to make decisions that affected the rights of people coming through his courtroom. It was not punishment by the law. It was punishment by the system, the removal of status, the acknowledgement that he had made choices that were wrong, the specific knowledge that everyone in Pine Ridge understood what he had done. Mayor Gordon Fitch served his sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Allenwood in Pennsylvania. He was released after 5 years and 3 months, reduced for good behavior. He did not return to Pine Ridge. He moved to Florida, where he lived quietly and did not speak to the media about his time in prison or his understanding of what he had done. He sent a letter to one person, to Patricia Harmon. The letter said, "I do not expect your forgiveness. I do not expect the forgiveness of the people I harmed. But I want to acknowledge that I understood during my time in prison, that I had used my position to extract from people who had no power to resist. I understood that the system I had created was designed specifically to prey on people whose circumstances made them vulnerable. I understood that my specific role was to direct that system and to profit from it. I understand that understanding this now does not undo what I did. I am writing this not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge that the investigation that led to my conviction was just..." Patricia never responded to the letter. She filed it as evidence of some small capacity for acknowledgement, but she did not believe it represented genuine understanding. And she was not interested in Fitch's redemption. She was interested in the people who had been harmed and in making sure that the system that had harmed them was dismantled. The system was dismantled. The operation was shut down. The predatory relationship between the police department and the people driving on Route 22 was ended. But the damage remained. The damage was in the specific knowledge that people in Pine Ridge now had, The knowledge that the systems that were supposed to protect them could become systems that extracted from them. The damage was in the fact that 43 people had lost money and time and trust. And while restitution could address the financial loss, it could not address the time or the trust. 14 months after the night of the stop, a Friday evening in late November, Diana was driving. This was deliberate. It was not discussed, but it was deliberate. Somewhere in the months after the verdict, after the restitution had been distributed, after the department had signed the consent decree, and the federal monitor had been assigned, and the machinery of accountability had been set in motion. Marcus and Diana had arrived at an unspoken agreement that Diana would be the one to drive home on Route 22. It was not that Marcus was incapable of driving. It was that there was something specific that needed to be restored, not his capacity to function, but his capacity to be at peace in his own car on the road where he had been stopped. Diana understood this. Diana had been in the car during the stop. Diana had reached forward and turned off the stereo without being asked. Diana had adjusted her body to accommodate the presence of a badge and all the history that came with it. Diana understood what it meant to sit in a car with someone who had been stopped by the police and to understand, in that moment, that compliance was not a shield. That authority could escalate without warning. That the systems that were supposed to protect you were not protecting you. So, Diana was driving. Marcus was in the passenger seat. His hands were in his lap. Not on anything, they were relaxed. He noticed this as a fact, the way you notice a sound that has stopped, the specific quality of its absence. His hands were relaxed, and he was not monitoring the speedometer, and he was not rehearsing conversations that would never happen, because the systems that had allowed those conversations to happen had been dismantled. The stereo was playing. It was the same station that had been on the night of the stop. Diana had put it on without comment, and Marcus had noticed and said nothing. The song was not the same song, but the station was the same. And there was something about that continuity that mattered. The pines along Route 22 looked the same. The darkness was the same darkness. The mile marker where Tolliver's cruiser had pulled them over was coming up on the right. Diana did not slow down. She drove through it at exactly the posted speed limit, which was 45 miles per hour. She did not look at the marker as they passed it. Marcus did look. He looked at it until it disappeared behind them, and then he looked at his wife. She was humming, quietly, the same song she had been humming on the way home from their anniversary dinner 14 months ago. The song that had been playing when the lights appeared in the mirror. She may not have realized she was doing it. Marcus was not going to tell her. A Pine Ridge police cruiser passed them going the other direction. It was a new unit, newer model than the ones from Tolliver's era. Part of the fleet replacement mandated by the federal consent decree. The officer inside was young, maybe mid-20s, someone who had not been part of the system that had extracted from people. The officer raised 2 fingers from the wheel, a professional acknowledgement, a nod. Marcus raised 2 fingers back. They continued driving. They did not speak. Diana took the Ridgemont Drive exit. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to houses where people have gone to sleep and left a porch light on. She pulled into their driveway. She turned off the engine. For a moment they just sat, the way they sometimes do when neither of them is ready to let a drive end. "You know what I realized?" Diana said, not looking at him, looking out through the windshield at the house that was theirs, in a neighborhood they had chosen, on a street where their neighbor missed her. Haynes waved at them every morning from his driveway, whether they waved back or not. "What?" Marcus said. "Amara Okafor's medical tests are done," Diana said. "Her heart is healthy. She's going to be a pediatric cardiologist, Reyes is at the state police. Beckett can't stamp another fraudulent forfeiture from behind that bench. The consent decree is in place. The revenue extraction has stopped. She paused. The porch light illuminated her face. She looked at peace. The way you look when you have accomplished something you set out to accomplish. None of that undoes what happened to your father on that road, she said. None of it undoes what happened to the 43 people before Okafor. But it's load-bearing. It holds something up. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the porch light. He thought about his father, who had been pulled over 11 times in 1 year on a road in Raleigh, who had never complained, who had just driven slower. He thought about what it meant that his daughter had the capacity to do something about those 11 stops, and the hundreds of other stops like them, and the systems that had made those stops inevitable. My father would have filed a complaint, he said, if he thought it would matter. We made it matter, Diana said simply. She got out of the car. He got out of the car. They went inside. The door closed. The porch light stayed on. 6 months later, spring. A Tuesday in March. Amara Okafor is 12 years old. She attends middle school in East Baltimore, 3 blocks from the apartment where she and her father live. Her mother lives in Atlanta, and they video call on Sundays. And Amara tells her about school and homework and her plan to become a pediatric cardiologist. Specifically, the kind of cardiologist who works with children from families who do not have access to advanced cardiac care. She knows, in the general way that children know things that adults consider too complicated to explain, that something happened involving a police officer and her father's money, and that people she will never meet helped make it right. Her father does not dwell on it. He goes to work. He comes home. He has not taken a second job since the restitution check cleared. On a Tuesday in March, Amara has a school assignment. Write 1 page about a person who changed something. Most of her classmates write about historical figures, MLK, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X. Amara writes about her father, which is not what her teacher expected. She writes about the $40 withdrawal fee her father paid every week for 8 months at a check cashing place, because without the $3,400, he didn't have enough in his account to avoid bank fees. She writes about the second job, nights at a grocery distribution warehouse, which meant he wasn't home when she got back from school, which meant she did homework alone and made her own dinner, which she was old enough to do, but that's not the same as it being okay. She writes about the morning the restitution letter arrived, and he called her into the kitchen to show her, and explained, simply, that people had made it right. She writes about understanding. In that moment, that injustice was not something that had to be permanent, that systems could be changed if people with power decided to change them, that her father had not done anything wrong, but he had to wait for people who had more power than him to fix it. My dad didn't do anything wrong, she writes in the last sentence, but he had to wait for people who had more power than him to fix it. I'm going to be one of those people, just without the waiting. She gets full marks on the assignment. Her teacher keeps a copy. Her teacher shows it to the principal. The principal reads it and sees something in it, not just a child's understanding of justice, but a commitment to being the kind of person who makes systems change. The principal does not make a big deal of it. The principal simply makes sure that Amara's essay is preserved, that it is kept somewhere safe. Because things like this matter. Amara gets the essay back with the full marks and the teacher's note, and she puts it in a folder, and she does not think about it again until 3 years later, when she is applying to high schools, and she realizes that her commitment to being a pediatric cardiologist is not a childhood fancy, but an actual plan, an actual life trajectory. And the note from her teacher reminds her of why she made that plan in the first place.